On December 10, 2021, two respected Kentucky businessmen, Ron Eldridge and Nick Strong, took off in their sleek Beechcraft Bonanza after a long trip home from Florida. It was supposed to be an easy evening flight back to Danville, but just a few miles from their destination, a hidden mechanical failure, thick fog, and one split second of disorientation turned routine into tragedy. The plane vanished into the clouds, and moments later it was gone. So what really happened up there? Was it the weather, a broken part, or a series of human decisions that quietly built a trap? Let's dive in, and you'll see why this crash was anything but simple. Ronald Lee Eldridge wasn't a rookie. 61 years old, self-made the kind of guy who ran a successful excavating business and spent decades building things that lasted. His passenger that day, Lowell Nicholas, Nick Strong 63, was just as rooted, a well-known insurance executive, deputy sheriff, and board member for more community groups than you can count. These were hometown names in Nicholasville, Kentucky, both family men, both used to taking charge. Their ride, a 1966 Beech V35 Bonanza tail number, November 5704. Victor was a beautiful piece of American engineering. Sleek, fast, reliable, most of the time. Ron owned and operated it himself, having logged around 965 hours of flight time. He wasn't an airline pilot, but he was experienced enough to be confident, maybe too confident. That afternoon, they'd lifted off from Baxley, Georgia, after refueling, climbing smoothly up to 2,500 feet for the final leg home to Danville, Boyle County Airport. A perfect altitude for a VFR crew's visual flight rules where you rely on your eyes, not instruments. And at that point, nothing seemed wrong. Clear ahead, stable engine, decent tailwind. But this is the thing about aviation. A flight can start perfectly normal and end catastrophically fast. Out the windshield, the horizon was fading. Ahead of them, Kentucky's December weather was thickening into haze and low clouds. The forecast called for a warm front and moisture pushing north, the kind of setup that looks harmless on paper, but quietly builds a trap for anyone still flying visual. And that's where the first quiet mistake happened. Not a reckless one, not even an obvious one, just that small, subtle assumption every pilot makes: I can make it home. By late afternoon, that warm front was spreading a blanket of fog drizzle and low overcast across central Kentucky, ceiling about 300 to 500 feet, visibility shrinking by the minute. It's the kind of weather where the horizon disappears and even ground lights smear into a white blur. Now here's the crazy part. This was the same weather system that later that night spawned one of the worst tornado outbreaks in Kentucky's history. That gives you an idea of just how unstable the atmosphere really was. Yet, according to the investigation, Ron never obtained a weather briefing, no call to flight service, no check-in via ForeFlight. He just went. No IFR flight plan, no radar advisories, nothing. It's extremely frustrating because he wasn't careless, he was just comfortable. The kind of comfort that builds slowly after years of routine flights. You trust your own eyes, your own judgment. But flying VFR into deteriorating weather is like driving into a wall of fog at highway speed. Statistics back it up. Roughly 72% of VFR into IMC accidents where visual flight pilots end up in clouds are fatal. Once you lose sight of the ground and you're not trained on instruments, you're basically flying blind. And experience doesn't really help. Ron's 965 hours looked solid on paper, but he had no instrument rating, no recent simulated instrument training. That means the moment he entered those clouds, his brain and his instruments were about to start fighting, and only one of them could win. Still, he pressed on. Maybe it was just 15 miles to go. Maybe he saw a break in the clouds. Maybe he thought, I've done this before. But that was the moment the trip home stopped being routine and started being survival. Now let's talk about the machine itself, because the Bonanza wasn't innocent in this story either. According to the NTSB, investigators found that the engine-driven vacuum pump had fractured. One of the screws that secured the inlet cover plate was missing, and the pump's drive coupling had snapped clean through. Inside the attitude gyro, there were no rotational scoring marks. That's aviation speak for the gyro wasn't spinning when they hit. That's huge. It means the vacuum system, the heart of the Bonanza's flight instruments, was already dead before impact. The attitude indicator and heading gyro, both vacuum-powered, had gone dark. In other words, the pilot probably looked up and saw his most trusted instruments either frozen or slowly toppling over. To understand why that matters, you've got to know what these pumps do. In older GA airplanes, the vacuum pump creates suction that spins little gyroscopes inside those round gauges. Those gyros tell you which way is up when your eyes can't. When the pump fails, those gyros slow down and drift and they lie. They'll show a gentle bank when you're actually nose down and turning. What makes this especially frustrating is how preventable it often is. Most vacuum pumps have a recommended replacement interval about 500 to 1,000 hours or 6 years, but many owners push them far beyond that because, frankly, they tend to just keep working. The manufacturer of this pump told investigators they hadn't even built that model in over 20 years, so yeah, it was ancient. But don't get me wrong, the pump failure wasn't the cause of the crash, not by itself. The real danger was the timing. It probably failed well before the weather turned bad. So when Ron entered the clouds, his main flight instruments were already unreliable. That's like walking into a dark room right after your flashlight burns out. The NTSB called it a contributing factor, and that's exactly what it was, the spark that turned confusion into catastrophe. Because when the pump quit, so did Ron's ability to trust what he saw in front of him. Now here's where things get really frustrating. The Bonanza wasn't flying blind by design. It had a backup system, a precise flight standby vacuum setup. This little piece of engineering was meant to save the day if the main pump failed. But when investigators got to the wreck, the control knob for that system was found off. And since the hangar and all the maintenance records were wiped out by that tornado. The very next morning, no one could confirm whether the system had even been maintained or ever used in training. Here's how it works, or at least how it's supposed to. The standby system taps into the difference between engine manifold pressure and outside air pressure to create just enough suction to drive the gyros again. It's clever, but it's not automatic. You have to recognize the vacuum failure, pull the control knob out, and often reduce power or even descend to get enough pressure differential to make it work. In other words, it's not flip a switch, problem solved. It's recognize the emergency, know your airplane, and start managing power precisely. And that's where the problem lies. Most pilots treat that standby system like an insurance policy they'll never need. But when the time comes, very few actually know how to use it under stress. The manufacturer even tells owners to practice with it, build altitude versus vacuum charts for their own aircraft. Yet in the real world, almost no one does that. So when that vacuum pump snapped and those gyros went dark, the plane still had a backup that might have saved the day, but it stayed unused. The knob sat in the off position, and the pilot probably never had a moment to think about it. Because once spatial disorientation begins, there's no pause button. Everything happens in seconds. That's the tough truth here. A system designed to save your life doesn't mean a thing if you've never practiced using it. In aviation, even your backup can betray you not because it's broken, but because you never made it part of your muscle memory. After descending from 10,500 feet, the Bonanza leveled around 2,000 feet near the destination airport just below the thick layer of clouds. For a few minutes, everything went silent. ADS-B data vanished for nearly 7 minutes. Then when it came back, the track looked chaotic, erratic turns, climbing 500 feet sharp bank angles, and then suddenly a steep dive. That's the signature of spatial disorientation, when your inner ear becomes your worst enemy. Without visual cues or functioning gyros, your brain lies to you. It tells you the airplane's level when it's actually banking. Or worse, it tells you you're turning when you're not. The pilot probably thought he was correcting a slight tilt, when in reality he was tightening a deadly descending spiral, the classic graveyard spiral. Investigators could tell the engine was producing power. Right until the end, the propeller blades were bent backward in an S shape, a sure sign they were spinning fast at impact. The engine itself perfectly functional, no pre-impact failures. The control surfaces were intact, the fuel was clean, and the airplane hit the ground almost nose down at about a 75-degree angle. This wasn't a stall, and it wasn't an engine outglide. It was a full-power, high-speed loss of control. Now that's an important distinction. This wasn't the plane quitting. It was the pilot's senses quitting on him. Without the vacuum-powered gyros, he had no way to verify the aircraft's true attitude. And once he entered the soup fog mist, no horizon, his brain likely told him he was straight and level. But the data says otherwise. Within seconds, that illusion became a dive, and there was simply no altitude left to recover. It's really crazy when you think about it. A $20 screw on a 40-year-old vacuum pump sets off a chain reaction that even a skilled, experienced pilot can't escape. One small, invisible failure leading to a total loss of spatial awareness. Let's zoom out a bit, because this crash isn't just about a missing screw or bad weather, it's about the system we still fly in. Ron Eldridge made a series of human decisions that, when stacked together, created the perfect trap. He didn't check the weather, didn't file a flight plan, and likely didn't have recent experience flying partial panel, meaning using limited instruments after a failure. On top of that, he had a backup vacuum system that required manual activation and practice he probably never did. It's a familiar pattern in general aviation. Comfort breeds complacency. But here's the paradox. According to NTSB and AOPA data, true vacuum pump failures are rare, maybe 1 in every 1,000 GA accidents. Yet when they do happen, the outcomes are overwhelmingly fatal. Why? Because they almost always hit a pilot already flying VFR into IMC, a situation where workload is at its maximum and mental bandwidth is gone. And there's another systemic issue here: these old vacuum systems. Thousands of aircraft in the U.S. fleet still depend on them. We're talking about technology from the 1950s that spins a small carbon vane inside a metal canister to power flight instruments in 2021. Compare that to modern glass cockpits with dual power buses and solid-state attitude sensors that can run on a backup battery for hours. Yet the FAA hasn't mandated any overhaul or phase-out of these legacy systems. Even worse, some certified standby systems don't come with mandatory training requirements. You can legally own a system designed to save your life and never once demonstrate that you can use it. That's insane. This accident sits right at the crossroads of those failures: mechanical, human, and institutional. An aging vacuum system failed mechanically. The pilot, untrained for IMC, failed to adapt. And the larger system, the training culture, failed to ensure that safety equipment actually equals safety. It's not just a story about one flight, it's a mirror for how the GA world still mixes modern ambition with outdated assumptions. So what can we actually learn from this? First, always get a weather briefing. It takes 5 minutes, but it could have completely changed this story. Flying blind into a warm front is never worth the gamble. Second, don't trust old hardware. Vacuum pumps don't fail often, but when they do, it's catastrophic. Treat them like ticking clocks, replace them on schedule, or better yet, move to electric or glass panel backups. Third, practice your backups. A standby vacuum system is useless if you've never pulled that knob in real flight. Make it part of your routine training, not an emergency experiment. And last, know when to quit. There's no shame in turning around when the weather goes south. The best pilots are the ones who make it home another day. This crash wasn't random, it was a chain of small, ordinary decisions aligning at the worst moment. Break just one link in that chain and everyone walks away. So ask yourself, if it were me, would I know when to stop? If this breakdown made you think differently about flying, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it. One story, one choice could be the one that saves a life.